Example 1. Find the regression equation and graph the regression line. Use technology to find the equation of the regression line in which the explanatory variable, or x variable, is the amount of the lottery jackpot, and the response variable, or y variable, is the corresponding number of lottery tickets sold. Jackpot amounts are in millions of dollars, and the numbers of tickets sold are in millions. Requirements. We want to make sure the data are a simple random sample, which it is. We want to use StatCrunch to graph the scatter plot. So let's go ahead and graph the scatter plot. So we're going to go ahead in here and we're going to open up in StatCrunch. We're going to put in the column for jackpot, which represents the X values, or we're putting those numbers in here. Then we have the tickets, and those numbers are in the second column. We want to create a scatter plot. So we're going to go to graph, scroll all the way to scatter plot, select the X variable, which is the jackpot, select the Y variable, which is the tickets, and then now we're just going to scroll all the way down and make sure that we just select the vertical and horizontal lines. And then let's just go ahead and label the x-axis. Well, the x-axis label is going to be the jackpot, and then the y-axis represents the tickets. So let's go ahead and compute, and there is our scatter plot. So let's go ahead and copy that. So here is our graph, and we want to be able to analyze this graph to make sure that it fits with what we want. So as you notice here, the scatter plot indicates that there's a pattern of points which is reasonably close to a straight line pattern. So therefore, it works with step number 2. And you can see here that there are no outliers, so therefore the requirements are satisfied. Okay, now we begin by finding the slope b subscript 1 as follows. Remember that r is the linear correlation coefficient, s subscript y is the standard deviation of the sample y values in tickets, and s subscript x is the standard deviation of the sample x values jackpot. So we want to be able to find the linear correlation coefficient, the standard deviation for both columns. So let's go ahead and open up in StatCrunch. Okay, so the first thing we do is going to go to Stat, go to Summary Stats, and select Correlation. So here we select both of these, and then select Compute, and now we have our correlation. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. So there is our correlation value. Okay, and then let's go ahead and then find the standard deviation. So I'm going to go to Stat, Summary Stats, and go to Columns. Select both jackpot and tickets, and then select standard deviation, and then select Compute. Now we're going to take a look at the standard deviation. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here. So with the slope, we know that r is going to equal, to round it to 6 decimal places, 0.947349. Okay, the standard deviation for the y values to 6 decimal places is 12.962553. And the standard deviation for the x values is 70.506107. So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug it into the formula to find the slope. Well, the slope is equal to r times the standard deviation of y divided by the standard deviation of x. So let's just go ahead and verify that on our calculator. So we're going to take 0.947349. We're going to multiply that by the numerator 12.962553. And we're going to take that value after we multiply it and then divide it by 70.506107. And so we get the following rounded to 6 decimal places. we get 0.174170. So that's going to represent our slope. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to be able to find the y-intercept. In order to find the y-intercept, now we need to find the mean of the x and the y values. So let's come back up here, okay, and then we can go to options, select edit. Instead of having the standard deviation, let's just find the mean now of these values. So there's our mean. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we can see here the following. We know that from the first step, we found that the slope is 0.174170. The mean for the jackpot values, which is x, is 214.88889. And the mean values for the y is 26.555556. So now what we're going to do is we're going to plug this into our formula. So let's go ahead and do that. So to find the y-intercept, okay, we're going to take the mean of the y's, which is 26.555556, and then we're going to subtract the slope times the mean of the x values. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that in our, in our calculator. 26.555556 minus parentheses 0.174170 times 214.88889, close the parentheses and press enter, and round it to 6 decimal places. We get negative 10.871642. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to find the regression equation. So we're going to round both of these values to 3 decimal places. So if we round the slope to 3 decimal places, we get b subscript 1, which is equal to 0.174. And then if we round the y-intercept to 1 decimal place, we get b subscript 0, which is equal to negative 10.9. We can now express the regression equation as follows. Okay, so we know that y is now going to equal the y-intercept of negative 10.9 plus the slope, which is 0.174 times x, where y represents the predicted number of tickets sold and x is the amount of the jackpot. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to be able to take this line and now graph it with the scatter plot. So what we want to do is graph the regression equation, which is the one we just found here, on the scatter plot of the jackpot tickets data from the previous examples, and examine the graph to subjectively determine how well the regression line fits the data. So we're going to use StatCrunch to graph the regression line. So in order to do that, we're going to come in here, okay, and then we're going to go back to the graph section. So we're going to go to graph and we're going to select scatter plot. We want to make sure that our x variable is the jackpot. Our y variable represents the tickets. Okay, and now over here where it says overlay polynomial order, we're going to go ahead and select that and select 1 because that represents a linear line. This equation is a linear regression equation, so we're going to select 1, and then we're going to select this scenario here. C subscript 0 is the same thing as B subscript 0, which represents the y-intercept. So the y-intercept of this problem is negative 10.9. Okay, and then we're going to put in C1, which is the same thing as B1, and that's going to represent the slope. Well, the slope here is 0.174, so let's put in 0.174. And then what we're going to do is, again, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we put in jackpot, which represents the X values. And then we're going to put in tickets, which represents the Y values, and make sure that we have horizontal and vertical lines. And now let's select compute. So now we can see that line here that we graphed. So let's go ahead and graph that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and label that graph. So here's our graph. Okay, again, that red line represents the equation that we have just graphed. So let's go ahead and label that. So the red line is y hat, or the regression line of negative 10.9 plus 0.174x. Okay, so we can see that this line kind of goes in the middle of all these points. Therefore, we can say that the regression line appears to fit the points well, but the points are not very close to the line.